Welcome back to Backstage Chatter. I'm your host and moderator, Sarah Day. In our opening episode of the series, we encountered a satirical, campy, and queer spin on a Quebec music icon, Celine Dion. We talked with the creative team of Titanic, Marla Tai, and Constantine. Hope you enjoyed that conversation. For the second show in the Segal season, another major musical figure of Montreal and Quebec, the iconic Leonard Cohen. Born and raised in Montreal, he started out as a poet while a student at McGill University, and of course has gone on to an incredible career as a performer, as a poet, as a thinker, with fans all around the world. His career has had ups and downs, and his many friendships and his many lovers have become the stuff of lore. Interesting to note that he's also inspired so much musical and artistic output, including not one, but two murals in Montreal. We had the visual exhibit at the Musée d'Art Contemporain in Montreal some years ago. And he, in fact, inspired two theatrical pieces while he was still alive, one here in Montreal under the direction of Maurice Podbray, and another performance in Ontario, neither of which were that successful. But what we're going to talk about today is a fascinating production from Toronto. Soul Pepper Theatre is a nonprofit theater based in the city. And in addition to presenting great dramas and comedies, they also specialize in what you might call theatrical music documentaries. Their take on Leonard Cohen's life, music, and words is titled The Secret Chord. It was created by a trio, Frank Cox O'Connell, Marnie Jackson, and Mike Ross. Frank directs the production. The concert show launched in the year following Leonard's death in November 2016. Soul Pepper remounted the show this past summer to sold-out audiences, and now it comes to Montreal, the city that is inseparable from Leonard's legacy and lore. 5 performers and 5 band members take you through Cohen's canon, reinventing his words and music. The cast includes radio-topping singer and theater maker Divine Brown, she of Old School Love fame. And coming home with this show, Travis Knights, who is a wonderful tap dancer originally from Montreal who studied with tap legend Ethel Bruneau. For today's conversation, though, we will take a look at Leonard's shifting spirituality and his lifelong connection to his family's synagogue, as well as getting an inside look at one of his final creations, the Grammy-winning album You Want It Darker, a meditation on life, death, and God. For that story, we turn to Cantor Gideon Zelermyer. He is the cantor at the Shaar Hashomayim Synagogue in Westmount. Born in Providence, Rhode Island, he studied in Tel Aviv and Washington, D.C. Gideon arrived in Montreal as the cantor at the Sher Zion Bethel Synagogue in 2001. 3 years later, he moved from Côte St. Luc Road to Kensington Avenue in Westmount to take over responsibilities at the Shaar Hashomayim, where Leonard Cohen attended as a child. The cantor also sings the anthem before Montreal Canadiens games at the Bell Centre, despite growing up in Hartford as a big Whalers fan in Connecticut. Cantor Zelermyer is also a soloist who has performed all over the world. In 2016, he sang with the synagogue's choir on Leonard's 14th album, You Want It Darker. That song was released on Cohen's 82nd birthday, September 21st. It topped charts and critics' lists for that year and remains a favorite in Cohen's canon, which has spanned so many decades. Cantor Zelermyer, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for that extremely generous introduction.
I understand that you were actually singing last night at the Bell Center.
Yes, unfortunately, my winning percentage went down last night as an anthem singer, but it's always fun to do, and it's a special source of pride for me, being a dual citizen, to be able to sing at a game against an American team and sing both my national anthems, and I think it's a nice lift and a pick-me-up for the Jewish community to see a kippah at center ice, especially in these trying times.
Is it much more difficult to perform at the Bell Center in front of tens of thousands of people, or is it harder to face the crowd at the Shaar every Saturday?
It's actually easier at the Shaar because the Shaar, I have my back to people. I'm facing the arc. And yeah, it's not quite as big, but it's still pretty large. But it's just a lot of fun to do. You know, the Canadians are a legendary Montreal organization. So is the Shaar. So in a strange way, you're representing two iconic institutions at the same time.
And two institutions that people are intensely faithful to as well. Did you grow up listening to Leonard Cohen?
I did not really. I certainly, once I came to Montreal, I was very quickly told that there are 3 most important things I need to know about Montreal. Montreal bagels are the best. That everything sports-wise begins and ends with the Canadians, and that Leonard Cohen is the be all and end all of anything artistic and musical. So I really started to delve into the canon when I got here. But
That's
there were certain little lyrics that would pop their way in, and I certainly was aware of him, but not necessarily to the same degree as I was once I moved to Montreal.
so you had to actually kind of come at it as a student. Like you had to apply yourself in trying to, get into the community, the kind of networking that you have to do when you're new and you're integrating yourself. You were kind of a student.
Absolutely, and certainly once I came to the Shaar, Leonard is a tremendous source of pride to people at the Shaar, and especially in the early years of my time. I mean, it's hard to believe this is year 21 for me at the Shaar.
Yeah.
But in the early years, you would encounter regularly people who went to Hebrew school with him, people for whom he was their camp counselor. You would see family members at shul, and he was in a phase where it was sort of the post the post absconding manager phase, when he was needing to replenish his financial storehouses, that he was putting out albums regularly and was touring. And it's quite unusual to have a member of your congregation touring, and especially I guess I only really came to appreciate it later, the fact that here was a band in his mid 70s who in one calendar year managed to sell out the Beacon Theater in New York, which seats about two and a half 3,000, then sell out the Radio City Music Hall, which sits about 6,000, and then sell out Madison Square Garden, which sits over 20,000, all in the same calendar year. It's unheard of, and I my first encounter really was when I made my first recording with the Shaar Choir, and his first cousin's wife sent it to him, and she approached me and said, "Leonard responded really positively to your recording, and maybe you want to be in touch with him. Here's his email." And yeah, exactly, that was my reaction. I had no idea how to spontaneously email Leonard Cohen. So I waited a few months, and as Rosh Hashanah grew near, I sent a message to him, and I wished him a happy and healthy New Year. I figured that was a sort of an
A
easy
nice
entree.
a nice opening.
Exactly, and I wished him a happy and healthy New Year. And I received in response the most remarkable email that I've ever received in my life. May your voice reach that place with a capital P and bring down the blessings. And I had never encountered a summary of what my role is as a cantor that is so pithy, yet cuts to the quick in such a remarkable way as that email. And it was the beginning of a correspondence that lasted about 9.5 years. And it was really at these sort of calendar mile markers of, I'd wish him a happy Passover, and he'd write back. One year he wrote back, "I'll see you at the foot of Mount Sinai. I'll be the one wearing headphones." and and I thought to myself, can he ever write anything normally? But the really cute part of it was that he would always sign off his emails to me fraternally Eliezer, his Hebrew name. And I loved that correspondence, and it just sort of went nonchalantly back and forth with no expectation on my part of anything more than that. That was sufficient for me. And when it came to the touring years, he was doing a few shows in the area, all of which sold out before I could get my hands on tickets. So feebly, I sent him a message and I said, if you can procure 4 tickets for me, my rabbi, and our wives, we would like to buy them. And I put "buy" in all capitals and boldface. Within an hour or two, I was CC'd on an email from him to his tour manager saying, please leave 4 complimentary tickets for my rabbi, my cantor, and their wives. And I wrote back and I said, thank you, but I didn't ask for complimentary tickets. I'd really like to pay for them. And he responded, all that you do in my home community means so much to me. So actually, he didn't say community, he said my shul. All that you do in my shul means so much to me the least I could do is comp you. So I wrote back again and I thanked him and I said, where can I make a charitable contribution that would have some meaning for you? And he wrote back, any soup kitchen will do, the closer to home, the better. So, he was this figure in the world of poetry, lyrics, rock and roll, etc. Yet his heart was still very much here and very much on the simple day-to-day struggles of normal people. And I just found that to be remarkable. And it was the beginning of a beautiful friendship, as they say.
I want to go back to Leonard's relationship to the Shaar and your relationship with him. But let's start with also the work that he was thanking you for. What is the day-to-day like for a cantor? What's your role?
Um, the day-to-day life for a cantor is at once predictable and unpredictable. The predictable side is you have a service in the morning and a service in the evening that needs populating by 10 adult males in order to run. And then the unpredictable part of it is all of the different elements of the life cycle that we tend to, whether it's a baby being born, and the needing of a name, or no, I'm not a mohel, but or singing at a circumcision. Um, then I teach them when they're preparing for their bar mitzvahs. Um, then I sing under their chuppah when they get married. And then the earlier part of the life cycle goes on when they're, God willing, having children. And then I'm singing at the funerals for their grandparents and everything in between. And so this is kind of the rinse, wash, repeat, but you never know when the load is going to start. and, um, and so a Sunday. I mean, I've a typical, a not unusual Sunday for me would be 10 services at 8:30, um, a baby naming or a bris at 10 o'clock, a funeral at 1, a wedding at 5, and then going to a shiva in my tuxedo directly from the wedding.
It is
And
it's a 7-day a week job.
yeah, you're on call. You're on call. There are periods of the year that are quieter, and there are periods of the year that are more active. But this is a big Jewish community. There's a lot going on. The Shaar is a big place within a big Jewish community, and there's a lot going on. Thankfully, I'm blessed to be at a synagogue that has an overwhelmingly rich musical tradition, and so we've had a choir at every service, Shabbat and holidays, since 1887. Which
1887.
1887,
You heard
which is
correctly.
which is really quite unusual. Unusual for a number of reasons, partly because of just the natural changing trends, um, of synagogue worship, of life in general, that has become more casual and less formal. And yet we still maintain our nearly 180-year-old traditions of the clergy and the people sitting on the pulpit wearing top hats and striped pants and morning coats. And it's a throwback. It's a real throwback. And the choir means that we have a musical tradition that lasts probably longer than most synagogue choirs in the world, which have evaporated by attrition, or budget cuts, or which were destroyed by the Nazis in Europe. Um, I feel a tremendous historical, not just artistic, responsibility to make sure that this tradition is strong. And um, and that was actually one of the elements that sort of came out after Leonard died. There was an interview that was published in a French rock and roll magazine in which he was asked about why he wanted the choir and me involved in his recording, and um, he said something, and I'm paraphrasing. I could get the exact quote, but he said something like, "The choir and the cantor were the only enjoyable part of compulsory synagogue attendance." And then that which made me smile. But then the serious part was, there are times when you want to show that there is nourishment to be had from this culture. And that to me was just an unbelievable endorsement of what we do. If you, and again, what I'm about to say does not mean to cast aspersions at other liturgical choices or synagogue choices. Um, but often these days, the common denominator of music that you hear in synagogues is how accessible is it, which means how simple is it, which means how dumbed down is it, which means how it ends up sounding a lot campy or nursery rhyme tunes, all of which is great for teaching children, and has a time and a place, and yet I personally look for something deeper. I look for something more sophisticated and more elaborate. I want to be feeling that I'm a part of something that's larger than myself and that makes me have to stretch myself in order to encounter it in a meaningful way. And I think that, I think back to little Leonard, who obviously was not your normal child, who, talks about when his father died at age 9, and he created a ritual for himself where he took one of his father's ties, tucked in some written words of his own, and buried it somewhere in his backyard. I mean, so he's sitting there and listening to the choir and the cantor and the Shaar in the 1940s, and something is percolating up there, and he's moved in a way that will last him to the later years of his life, when he wants to make his last artistic statement, and he wants the sonorities that he remembers from his youth. And so I always tell young cantors, and I always tell my choir, no matter how many times we've sung this piece of music, or no matter how many times you encounter a particular prayer, you never know what young person is sitting behind you, and how what you're about to do is going to implant itself in that person's soul, and how that seedling is going to grow over the course of that person's life, and at what point in their lives are they going to turn to it for a sense of meaning when they're looking for something. And that to me always reminds me and keeps me centered in terms of what I'm doing when I get up in front of the synagogue and I sing prayers.
That makes me think of artists who tour for a living, especially nowadays with the music business. It is essential to be touring for much of the year. It's a grueling process. And when I see a popular act, and all I can think is, I want to hear that one song I remember from 10 years ago. Are they going to play the hits? And to think about our lives, no matter what you do for a living, your life is routine at certain points. And what is it like to be a pop star where you're an artist, but you also have to play the things that people are expecting? I imagine that is probably something a lot of the big and less big stars are thinking about, which is just it's kind of by rote. You know how to do this. You've done it a million times before, but someone in the audience is going to hear it for the first time or for the umpteenth time and take it with
Sure.
them.
It makes me think of a concert that I did years ago here in Montreal with a rabbi who's no longer in Montreal, giving words of introduction at the beginning of the concert. And he said, people think that the rabbi has the most challenging role in a synagogue because we're expected to come up with new and inspiring words every week that are topical and relevant and so on. He said, I think that the cantor has the more challenging role because the cantor has to take the same words, cannot deviate from them, words that were written many, many hundreds of years ago, and yet make them fresh and relevant every week. And I think that, certainly in my relationship with Leonard, he understood that. When we would exchange greetings before Rosh Hashanah, and he would say things like, I think the last year that he sent me greetings right before he died was, strength and deep intention be yours in the coming days. And the record launch for You Want It Darker was the day after Yom Kippur. So for people who don't know what Yom Kippur is, I mean, people think of Yom Kippur and they think of, yeah, you're sitting there and you're really hungry. For me, it's a 25-hour fast, and I'm singing about 12 of those hours while not drinking and etc. And so Yom Kippur finishes that year, and then the next morning I'm at the airport at 6 in the morning for an 8 a.m. flight to LA. And when I met him at the press conference, he said to me, I can't believe that you are here after what you did yesterday. But he appreciated that in a deeply understanding and empathetic kind of way. And for somebody who spent as many hours on the road and as many months, years touring, and there are nights that you want to do it and there are nights that you don't, but you have to do it.
You have to do it.
And the show must go on.
So let's go back to the moment that led to You Want It Darker. You already have like an email correspondence with him by nature of the fact that you're now the cantor at his hometown shul, and you're exchanging notes in passing right before or on the holidays. Did you ever think that you would actually get a call, though, or an email that would say, let's collaborate?
No, absolutely not. Um, Absolutely not. And there were certain people around the Shaar who had this recurring kind of fantasy that because they went to Hebrew school with Leonard, they would be able to somehow just pick up the phone and call him and say, "Leonard, come to the Shaar and play a concert." I mean, that's not the way it worked. Um, but I would hear these conversations from time to time and sort of smile, and nobody really knew that I had this correspondence with him other than my wife. I just would, you know, and it would, again, once or twice a year. So after the high holiday greeting that year, sometime in November of 2015, he sent another message and he said, would you be interested in collaborating on an album? I'm looking for the sound of the cantor and choir of my youth. And I received this email at about 6 o'clock in the morning, um, screamed unholy words. Um, then I sort of gathered myself and tried to appear nonchalant by responding. I said, "Hallelujah, I'm your man." And
A nice tip to that famous song of his. Well, actually, I think it was an album, I'm Your Man.
yes, it was an album and a song, and it was at you mentioned the exhibit at the MAC at the Musée d'Art Contemporain, and that was based upon the album "I'm Your Man." That we the Shaar Choir and I were in the exhibit, with a wonderful, wonderful installation by a Jewish South African artist based in Berlin, with a collection of 18 or so men between the ages of 65 and 85 who were singing along to Leonard's album, and we were the backing singers. And it was so special, that exhibit. If you remember it, it was really, really wonderful. But anyway, so Leonard wrote back and said, "Great, Adam, my son, who's producing the album, will be in touch. Meanwhile, here's something to listen to." And he sent me this very rough draft of "You Want It Darker." And um, it was very stark. It was just a keyboard and a drum machine keeping time, and Leonard's gravelly voice. And as you said, when you see words like magnified, sanctified, or um, if you are the dealer, I'm out of the game. If you are the healer, I'm broken and lame. And you realize that this is not just a tap your toe, simple song, but that something far deeper is going on in his emotions. And magnified, sanctified, of course, are the opening words of the Kaddish, the prayer for mourning. And he's clearly facing down his mortality head on. And the chorus word for the song is Hineni, Hineni, here I am. And, Leonard liked one word Hebrew choruses, obviously, from Hallelujah. Worked out pretty well for him. And but Hineni is a totally different. Hallelujah is ubiquitous. Hallelujah appears everywhere. Hallelujah, the Canadians won, or Hallelujah, it's snowing today and I want to go skiing, but Hineni is a very charged word. It is the most famous encounter. There are a number of encounters of it, but the most famous encounter of it is in the story of the binding of Isaac. Abraham is told, "Take your son, your only son, the one you love, and bring him to a place that I will tell you, and sacrifice him." And Abraham does so. He brings Isaac, and he brings gathers the wood and takes a knife. And if you can imagine, the movie version, the knife is glinting in the sunlight as he's about to plunge it down into his son, who's tied up on this altar that he's made. And all of a sudden, Abraham hears a voice from heaven saying, "Avraham, Avraham, Abraham, Abraham." And Abraham says, "Hineni," as if to say, "What do you want from me? I'm doing what you told me to do. It's the most awful possible thing that you can tell me, a father, to do to my child. but I'm here and I'm serving and I'm doing it. And it interrupts him and it stops him, and he unties his son and substitutes a ram that he finds in the thicket, which is why we blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah when we read the story. But Leonard saying Hineni is saying, I've been through a lot. I'm still here and I'm serving you. And I'm ready for whatever the next step is. And that's really intense. And Leonard didn't write light. I mean, yeah, he wrote lighthearted stuff, but even the lighthearted stuff is intense. Um, and I realized once I heard that, and then a couple of other tracks on the album, that this was Leonard really reckoning with the last days of his life. And I don't think anybody necessarily knew how infirm he was, because this was November 2015. The album came out, as you said, on his birthday, or the song came out on his birthday, and the album a month later in the fall of 2016. And the album launch was the day after Yom Kippur in October, and within 5 weeks he was gone. And he didn't die by any of his infirmities. He died because he woke up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, hit his head, went back to bed, and didn't wake up, which probably was a blessing given all the other things that were going on with him, and his health. But he knew the end was near. And I think he was trying to tackle some of those issues.
It's crazy that it's almost, I hate to say it in speaking of death, but a poetic ending for a man of his stature and his legend. So going back to when he, said, I'd like to collaborate on this song. I mean, as a cantor, you have to have a tremendous amount of confidence to do the kind of work it is that you do. But I have to wonder if there was any doubt or hesitation about rising to the task, or did you actually say, wow, this is like, I made for this? What was
one of the things that was so remarkable about the process of making that recording with him was that from the outset, the mandate was clear. I'm looking for the sonorities of the cantor and choir of my youth. And we took that very seriously. We didn't want to try to be anything else. We weren't trying to do Bohemian Rhapsody style backing vocals. I wasn't trying to sound like Freddie Mercury, or as much as that would be awesome. And I stuck to sounding cantorial. And it's very easy. Many of my colleagues have tremendous amounts of success, taking Broadway tunes or pop tunes or things like that, and putting them into services. I personally don't do that. It's an artistic choice that I've made. And again, I stuck to those values with this. The choir sounds like the choir that you hear every week at the Shaar. The improvising that I do, and it was improvising, I'll tell you about that in a second, at the end of the track, that's what a cantor sounds like. And so when I knew that I could do what he was asking me. And if he had gone, he wouldn't have gone to an uncomfortable place for me, because he had a tremendous amount of reverence for my role in the community, and he had a tremendous amount of appreciation for the legacy that I represent at the Shaar. And for instance, there were actually 2 songs that are on that album that we participated in. The second one is called "It Seemed the Better Way," and the lyrics go like this: "It seemed the better way when first I heard him speak. Now it's much too late to turn the other cheek." So that's definitely Leonard is listening and appreciating the words of Jesus. And as he did with many other different faiths, his explorations of different religious traditions were well known and well documented. And so Leonard wrote to me a couple of days before the recording session for that song, and he said, "I'm a bit concerned. There are some Christological references in the lyrics, and I don't want that to be a problem for you as the cantor and your choir in the community that you represent."
I assume that's
And
the reference to, being crucified is one of the lyrics of that song.
Well, that's the crucified is in You Want It Darker for
And You
sure.
Want It Darker.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is so Turn the Other Cheek is a very famous reference to a verse that Jesus offers in the New Testament. And so I wrote him back and I said, "You're saying my understanding of your lyrics is this. As presumptuous as it might be, here's my understanding. It seemed the better way when first I heard him speak, but now at age 80 something, nearing the end of my life, it's much too late to turn the other cheek. In other words, I appreciate the wisdom and the beauty of your teaching, but I'm not a subscriber. I'm just passing through." And and he said, "That's fine with me. Let's go ahead." But the fact that he was concerned for the impact of his words on my role in the community, I found to be incredibly touching. And so, yes, Crucified is in You Want It Darker also. And you know, he wrote many songs with different biblical references and different references to prayer. Famously, not famously famous, but Raincoat asks about Did You Go Clear, which is a reference to Scientology. Obviously, he spent 6 years in a Buddhist monastery in silence. uh, you know, he was a real spiritual searcher, probably before it was en vogue to be a spiritual searcher. But I think what made him different from a lot of the Hollywood or LA, you know, spiritual searching crowd is that he didn't just explore in a surface way. He really dove in headlong. You know, there are lots of people who go to Kabbalah classes and walk out with a red thread around their wrist and consider themselves a Kabbalist. uh, Leonard did the work, read the Zohar, did the studying. People go to meditation classes. Not all of them end up spending 6 years on a mountaintop in a monastery. And so he didn't do things halfway. He
He wasn't
really
he wasn't skimming. He was really
no,
plunging in.
absolutely. And so you know, when it came time to we recorded You Want It Darker uh, at a studio here in Montreal, Hotel to Tango, which is owned by Howard Billerman, who was the first drummer for Arcade Fire, and is an all-around amazing guy.
And
And
if I'm not mistaken, is that the studio that's located in my lent? Is that near
yes,
the viaduct? Yeah.
exactly, exactly. And so around 2 o'clock in the morning, the choir files out of the studio, and I'm there with Howard and with Adam Leonard's son, and I said, "How does the song end?" And he said, "I don't really know. Do you have an idea?" And I said, "Well, there's an album. There's a song on the previous album that he did called Nevermind, and it actually was the theme song for the second season of True Detectives on HBO. Um, the first season was amazing. The subsequent seasons not so much, but the song was there. And the original album version of the song has a female Muslim singer improvising on the word salam in a very Islamic prayer mode, maqam kind of way. And I said, "Well, you have this, you know, Hineni Hineni chorus. Hineni is a liturgical word. It's also, you know, it's a word. Yes, it comes from the Torah, but it's also the name of a very well-known prayer on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Maybe I could try improvising in a very cantorial way on the word Hineni." And he said, "Okay, let's try it." So we set up a microphone and I went and I sang Hineni for about 10 minutes in different ways. And then I didn't hear anything about it for a long while. And then a few months later, I received a listening link from Sony, and there it was at the end of the song. And Leonard, I asked Leonard about it, and he wrote, "Your voice powerfully brings out the meaning of the word, and it was just what we were looking for," or something like that. And it was just an amazing shock and awe moment. You know, many of us in especially in larger congregations in affluent areas find ourselves with well-known congregants, but you know, not necessarily to the level of Leonard. And when you encounter them in a setting where, I the first time, the only time that I was liturgically in the same place at the same time was him was when I was singing at the funeral of a cousin of his. But that's how I encounter people, again, at those life cycle moments. And you don't expect a recording to come out of it, much less that it's going to win a Juno Award and a Grammy Award. That's just way outside of the line of reasonable expectations. Um, surreal, surreal, and obviously unable to be duplicated.
The awards actually came a little bit later, as they do following the release, but it
Yeah.
was a success right from the get-go. It was top of the charts in Canada, and it was really the motive, the I guess the touchstone for the album itself. Were you taken aback by its success?
I didn't know what it would be. Um, First of all, I had no experience with this. I'd never released a pop record. And cantorial albums do not make the top anything charts. Um, but I did know a little bit of what to expect about Montreal's outpouring of love for one of their favorite sons. And everywhere I went, it was just tremendous chest thumping Montreal proud. Um, People were so thrilled that Leonard had come back home musically to his roots. And all those people at the synagogue who went to Hebrew school with him, or who were high school classmates of his, or for whom he was their camp counselor, they were just so proud. And it's such a heartwarming way. And especially the record came out just before Rosh Hashanah, so everybody was in synagogue on those days, as they are. And again, just such an outpouring of pride and love. And I had so many people that I would send Leonard almost daily emails during that period. I ran into these 4 people, all of whom wanted to be remembered to you. Um, and it was really sweet, and he would respond with some of the comments, "Oh, yes, we were in the such and so fraternity together at McGill," or, "Oh, yes, we took this class together," or, "We went to camp together." Eh, I don't know how many cities that can happen in. But, Montreal is one of these multi-generational cities where people stay and generations of families stay. I mean, I know this because I'm grew up in the States, as you mentioned, and I married a Montrealer, and because of Michelle and her family, our boys are 5th generation members of the Shaar. Where else does that happen? I mean, the only other place that happens is actually where, my mother's from Curacao. Curacao is a tiny little island in the Caribbean, which happens to have the oldest synagogue in the Western Hemisphere on it. And it was a Dutch colony, and it was a stopping point on the way to the New World. And when my boys and I when I took my boys there 2 winters ago, yes, it's a real hardship to have to go visit your family in the Caribbean in the winter, I know. Um, but they became the 9th generation in my mother's family to set foot on the island. And that's really unusual. So many people move around in so many different ways, but to have Leonard, it was so important to him. One of the last emails I had from him was before Rosh Hashanah. It's a tradition to go and visit your family's graves at the cemetery. And he asked me if I would go and visit his family's graves. And I went, and I sent him a picture. And now Leonard is buried next to his parents and grandparents and great-grandparents. And that is really special. And that was so important to him, I think, in this whole evolution of this last album, and our role in it was connecting to home and to an eventual final resting place.
It's so interesting, though, to note that his resting place is also so meaningful to fans who know where to find it on Mount Royal. Is
Yep.
that it's beyond the Cohen family now, because people do gather and leave stones and recollections there. How does that, his grandfather and great grandfather were presidents and established presidents, like they were serving for many years at the synagogue, and you just mentioned your own sons are 5th generation at the shul. How does that generational inheritance influence your work and how the synagogue runs itself?
Well, it certainly made it challenging at the beginning because, especially if you come in from outside of the community, immediately you have to learn this history. And and a lot of people's sense of comfort and connection to the Shaar is the fact that, to use the old the line from the theme song to Cheers, where everybody knows your name. And so you have to figure that out pretty quickly in order to be successful. And and so that connection is not unique, but the fact that it's coming from a person like Leonard is unique. And he maintained his home in Montreal, but he didn't come to the Shaar for any services during the years that I was there. But again, there was this connection. He knew that was where he was going to end up. And the family connection was not, as you mentioned, not a casual one. Synagogue leadership is voluntary. It's a donation of time and resources and energies, and but people have professional lives. And so typically, if you're a president of a synagogue, it's for a period of 2 or 3 years, something like that. And if you look back at the history of the Shaar, from roughly 1896 to 1932, with the exception of a 4-year period, there were 2 presidents of the Shaar over almost 40 years. And it was Lazarus Cohen and Lion Cohen, Leonard's great-grandfather and grandfather. I mean, that's a dynasty. That's not just a presidency. 40 years. Lion, his grandfather, presided over the construction of our building in Westmount, and then remained president for another 10 years after he built the building. So it's not like you finish the project and then you go away. He was there and he was doing it. And so Leonard obviously grew up with this sense, much in the way that, he was very fond of the fact that he was a Kohen, that he was from the priestly class.
Can you
And
explain a bit more about what that means? Because he was open about talking about growing up with this kind of messianic kind of feeling. So how did that influence him, and what does it mean for someone who may not know what a
well,
Kohanim is?
so biblically speaking, the Kohanim were the priests. They were the priests that officiated all the rituals in the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. And the temple gets destroyed, twice, once in 586 BC and then once in 70 AD. And the second one marks a major evolution in Jewish practice, which is that there's no more temple, there's no more sacrifices. Synagogues get invented, the prayers that we have get invented, community centers, and so on. But the social importance of being a Kohen is maintained. Kohen get the first aliyah. They're the first ones to get called up to the Torah. On festival days, they bless the congregation, and this is where Mr. Spock got live long and prosper from. So they maintain this mystical kind of an importance, even though they're no longer officiating at the temple sacrifices anymore, and are seen as leadership in a ritual way within the community. And so, for young Leonard, watching his father, his grandfather, etc., it's a time in the services on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur when they would go up to the pulpit, and they would cover themselves with their talis and do the Spock hands thing, and which is not Spock hands, it's Kohen hands. And they would bless the community. And I'm sure this again made a profound impression on Leonard. And whereas others might roll their eyes at it or take it, a little less seriously, Leonard saw this as a serious anointing of a role within the community. And I think that was something that he very much gravitated to. He would he developed a what's the word I'm looking for? A signet, or like a seal that was a Magen David made out of 2 interlocking hearts and the Kohen hands. And that would often be on his artwork. You find it with in his books of poetry and things like that, where he would publish different sketches and things. And this Kohen identity was very much a part of who he was. And in fact, in the second of those songs. You Want It Darker was the major, the one that everybody knows. It Seemed a Better Way is less known. It Seemed a Better Way, our choral contribution to that song is bookended by, or the song is bookended by our choral contribution, which is unaccompanied humming to a particular melody, which is ah, 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 which is taken from the music that we sing at the Shaar when the Kohanim bless the community. And I don't know how many years, but it's probably at least 75 or 85 or 90, it's a lot of years that we've been singing that music. And we thought to incorporate that into the arrangement for this song because of who Leonard was as a Kohen. And he loved it. He responded so positively to the idea. And, to be able to, again, like, as I mentioned, that Leonard didn't do these things casually. To talk in liturgical and biblical references with somebody like that was just really astounding to me. The whole thing was so special.
You've described the moment where you got that first email from him early, 6 o'clock in the morning, and you've taken us to the studio in Milan where you're recording the song. Still not sure, how it's going to come together, how it's going to end. And then it gets released, and he, as you mentioned, passed away a short time after. But then the continued success of the song brought you to awards ceremonies and this great kind of international recognition. Can you tell us about that? What that was like?
Well, the Junos I was watching on TV, and Adam and his son Cassius accepted the Juno Award, which was really beautiful. Cassius is a remarkable young man, by the way. He's his he grew up in LA. He's growing up in LA. He's about 18 years old now. But his bar mitzvah was to be at the Shaar in March of 2020. And it ended up being online, unfortunately, like most of the bar mitzvahs were during the years of COVID. Speaks Hebrew, always spoke to me in Hebrew, remarkable kid. And I met him at the record launch. And so it was so wonderful to see two generations of Cohens accepting the award that was given to their father and grandfather posthumously. That was really special. The Grammys I was at, it was at Madison Square Garden in New York City. And their album was nominated for Best Rock Performance, and that's a pretty serious kind of an honor to be nominated for. It's not an obscure category; it's a pretty big category. Yet, with the evolution of the music world, it was only when I got to New York that I actually discovered that Best Rock Performance was not going to be given out at the show that was broadcast on TV. It's given out at what they call the premiere show, which is, it still has performances and stuff like that, but it's we have to go through 75 honors in a matter of a couple of hours. So it's kind of boom, boom, boom. And so I decided I wanted to go to that because, look, I'm an opera movie lover. All these CDs that you see behind me are opera and classical music. And I decided that I wanted to go and see who won the best opera recording and the best symphony recording and the best choral recording, because and I figured that the best rock performance would be at the main show. So I walk in and they hand you a sheet, and I'm looking down the list and there's best rock performance, and I said, oh God, well, thank God I got here, because otherwise I would have missed it. And so I was sitting between the people who were nominated for best gospel recording and the people who were nominated for best folk recording, and it was really the artists who were in this room who were not many fans. And they announced, and Leonard was up against the Foo Fighters and Chris Cornell and Kaleo, and they said, and the Grammy award goes to Leonard Cohen, and I shrieked. and it was entirely surreal. Nobody really can get into the Grammy Awards. I mean, it was really hard. I had to call a dear friend who lives in LA and has connections to CBS television in order to get in at all. and then to go and to see the project that you worked on win an award. Um, and I felt, and I've actually gained a larger appreciation of this as the years have gone on. There was a wonderful book that was put out a couple of years ago by Mati Friedman called Hood by Fire. And it was about Leonard going to Israel in 1973 and spending 5 weeks playing for troops at bases during the Yom Kippur War. And the early part of the book describes how, in the period leading up to that war, Leonard basically he put out an album that was not successful, and he said, "I'm done here. I'm in my mid-30s. It's a little bit late in life to be starting off on the road as a rock star. I feel like I've said what I have to say. Obviously, people aren't buying it. It's not consumer friendly, and I'm done." And he goes to Israel, and as the timeline has it, within 8 months, he puts out New Skin for the Old Ceremony, which has Who by Fire on it, and it has I'm blanking on the other songs right now, but it was a phenomenally successful album, and 4 or 5 songs that he would continue to play as favorites for the rest of his career. And so when I look back at the Grammy, and I say to myself, here's a person who almost thought that he was packing it in the early 70s, and now it's 2017 or 2018. I think it was January of 2018 when the award was given, and he's won an award for best rock performance. Now, I don't know whether the song I would categorize as rock, but that's not up to me. That's up to the Grammy people. But it is nice to be able to say that you're a verified rock star. And I just thought it was such a remarkable career arc for him. And again, honors didn't matter to him. He really, I mean, I when he received the Order of Canada, I believe it took some arm twisting to get him to show up for it, because he just didn't, it wasn't what he was about. But yet everybody wants to feel validated, and I'm sure that would have been a tremendous sense of pride to him. But I go back to the soup kitchen comment. Makes much more. It was much more impactful for him to have a simple donation to a soup kitchen locally than some grand gesture. And so it was nice. It was fun. It was amazing to be witness to, and yet I think that he certainly deserved it, but it wouldn't have been front and center on his mantelpiece.
No, of course, but also he did pick up accolades through the years, so I expect there was probably not a lot of space on the mantelpiece.
Probably not.
From my personal perspective, I was a radio producer. I still am a radio producer, and I remember reaching out to you the following morning to have you on our program to talk about this, and just remembering thinking this is such a shock kind of thing to be reaching out to a Montreal cantor to talk about being at the Grammys for a rock performance when obviously this was
If it was shocking to you, you can imagine how shocking
yeah.
it was to me.
You were just as surprised. The Secret Chord is coming to the Segal Center after wowing audiences in Toronto. You're going to hopefully see it with your wife in the next couple of days.
Yes, that's a plan.
And I'm just curious to know, like, it's hard to pick favorites. Is there any particular song that you're looking forward to seeing on stage?
So I have not researched what the set list is. Well, as you said, if you go to a concert and you have a dream set list, my dream Leonard Cohen set list includes what is absolutely my favorite Cohen song, which is "If It Be Your Will." And going back to the Cohen question, by the way, "If It Be Your Will" is a pretty direct translation of "Ken Yehi Ratzon," which is what the congregational response is to the blessing of the priests. And I find it to be a deeply moving, spiritual, humble song. And so that's on my list. I love "Come Healing." I love, I don't know, there's so many songs that I love. Again, I'm kind of happy that I didn't encounter the Cohen catalog early in life, because I don't think it would mean as much to me as it does now. Um, Being a father, being a husband, presiding over these life cycle ceremonies as I do, and having a front row seat to people's highest highs and lowest lows. And I think that that's a lot of what Leonard tackles in his lyrics. His battles with depression were were not hidden, or substances or women or any number of different things that he struggled with, and he struggled with them mightily and openly and honestly. And I think my appreciation for the struggle is different now than it would have been when I was a little kid. And I just I really have he has grown with me, and I have grown with him.
I think what so many people are drawn to is this acknowledgement of being a fractured, broken being in the world. The idea of we're all broken. That's how the light gets in is a frequent motive. Do you connect that to spirituality and to Judaism?
Yeah, I think that for me, the one of the most moving moments that I am present at for people is under the wedding canopy, and in particular the moment when you break the glass. And it's an acknowledgement that while this is a euphoric moment for this couple, there's a lot about the world that is not at all that way. And the breaking of the glass snaps you back into reality as you're about to leave this bubble of love and romance and hopes and dreams, to say there's a lot of work to be done. And we're now joining our lives, and together we can accomplish more than we would as individuals. And it's a mission. It's a call to action. In the same way we have to be ready to say hineni to it, like Leonard was. And that to me is a very moving way of looking at the brokenness of the world and acknowledging that we can play a role in trying to change and fix it. And it's certainly a constant repairing the world is part of our mantra as Jews. And God knows the world needs a lot of repair. And so if people like Leonard, if words and music, if art, and if shows like this can call people to action and awaken in them a sense of renewed dedication to give more to their communities and care more for the people that they encounter, uh, Ken Yehi Ratzon, may it be your will.
Cantor Gideon Zelermyer, thank you so much for your insight, for letting us into those email exchange and that late night recording session and sitting at the Grammys. You provided a tremendous amount of insight into Leonard's creative process and the history of the Shaar. We really appreciate it. So if you're watching this now, you're going to go into the secret chord with so much more context and history and appreciation. Enjoy the show, Gideon. I know you're going to have a great time.
I know
Thank
we
you.
will, and thank you so much for having me.
You've been listening to Backstage Chatter here at the Segal Center. I'm Sarah Day. Enjoy the secret chord.